So good. And I want you guys to, in real time, give us all of this education, okay? Like throughout the program. So we need to be saying living with HIV. We need to be saying acquired HIV. Okay, thank you. Please continue to tell us because we want to be updated, informed about how we destigmatize this illness even in the way that we talk. So thank you. Before we move on, and I know y'all aren't going anywhere, you're going to be backstage for a second. I want to invite you doctors to be over here in the comments. These folks over here in the comments are lighting it up. Minister Bobby Wiseman is over here lighting it up. Lady Bird Burgess, who we were talking about, who we're talking to on Facebook Live this week about HIV, is in there. Kevin Sauce from South Africa is in there. Tracy Dooley, all kind of folk up here. I see y'all. I see what y'all are saying. Y'all are on fire. Thank you. And so if there are questions, Dr. Driffin and Dr. Dyson, would you just look over in the comments and feel free to get people together as we need to be gathered, please? Okay.
Yeah. No, so just a few things I'll highlight here. I think I like LaTanya's comment around lack of education. And I think that's spot on too, is a reason why. And I'll even add on to that, like, we don't have the conversation candidly about sex in general, right? Like, so how can I get a conversation to talk to you about HIV prevention, STI prevention, if I can't even have a decent conversation with you just about sex, period, right? So that's from being able to have the conversation. I think it was maybe LaTanya also, or somebody else who said, even that word AIDS, right? Like, it's there, but usually you heard me try to correct and say it. And so I'll say why I said it: advanced HIV, right? Or, a later stage. Like, we don't like to say AIDS because AIDS is stigmatizing as well. And the other piece was around like this infected. I love that Dr. Driffin brought that out. Like, instead of also saying new infections, we say new diagnoses. People were diagnosed, right? Like with HIV, or, newly acquired HIV, but not infected, right? Because it's very stigmatizing and, not good language. And we always talk about people first language. So if you can remember that, putting the person first, because they're human before they have their diagnosis.
I love that. Thank you.
I love that too. I want to say, and I received that correction as a nurse. The word infection is a medical term, right? And so that's going to take a lot of reprogramming because it doesn't just apply to HIV. It applies to all kinds of cancers and other things. And so I will work on that. I will. But I want to say it's a medical term. I don't know. I got to think about that. Yeah.
All right, we gotta move on. Thank you so much, doctors. Y'all keep lighting it up in the chat. Some of the things I wanted to highlight before we bring on our next guest. We talked about PrEP, right? And please put in the chat or in the comments what you understand PrEP to be. We talked about PEP. Please put in the comments what you understand PEP to be so that we can all be educating each other and getting each other straight where we're not right, okay? We've talked about the difference between, we talked about language. We talked about living with HIV, newly acquired, new diagnoses instead of infected. We really want to get our language together. And we talked about something really interesting that I think we'll talk about more in another segment. 7,600 new infections among Black men. So we want to make sure that we address that tonight. We also talked about the modes of transmission. Dr. Dyson said they were blood, semen, rectal fluid, vaginal fluid, and breast milk. Okay? It's not forks, knives, plates, cups, toilets, blood, semen, rectal fluid, vaginal fluid, breast milk. Okay. Let's bring up our spotlight for tonight. Tracy, I'm so excited. Marvelyn Brown. I know Marvelyn Brown. She has been a huge inspiration to so many people for years and years and years and years. Marvelyn, how are you?
Hi, I'm marvelous as usual.
That's excellent. We want to give you an opportunity, Marvelyn, to allow this audience to hear your story, and that story has impacted me so much. I know that you and Tracy Blackman have worked together in the past as well, and we just want everybody to hear from you, and because you're so inspiring. So what we want to do is give you the actual spotlight and allow you to communicate your story. We're a little bit behind time, but I believe God that we're going to catch up. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay. So when you see us pop up, that means we need to wind it down and we're going to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, certainly. So you're giving me 10 minutes now to talk.
Yes, honey.
All right.
All right. All right. Y'all take us off this screen so Marvelyn can have the spotlight.
So my name is Marvelyn Brown. I was diagnosed with HIV at the age of 19 from a former boyfriend who I loved and who I trusted. I never voluntarily went in to get an HIV test. It took me to be sick on my deathbed, unrelated to HIV, having pneumonia, for doctors or me to even consider me being HIV positive. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and prior to my diagnosis, I was heavily involved in sports, and I consider myself just to be an all American teenager who was healthy. I wouldn't necessarily say I was health conscious, but playing sports allowed me to at least think that way. And I met a guy who grew up on like all the Disney princess movies. So for a very long time, I called this guy Prince Charming. He looked good. He smelled good. He was everything that I thought I wanted in a man. Remember, I was 19. Um, and we started our relationship. It became one day we were about to be intimate, and he let me know that he didn't have a condom. And when he said that, I thought it meant he loved me and he trusts me that much more because he did not want to use a condom. I'm thinking the worst thing that could happen was pregnancy. I definitely had heard about HIV, but I never thought that I can contract it. I thought it had a look, and it was very far off my radar. I was very ignorant to the virus. So we proceeded to have sex that night. It took me approximately 3 weeks to be sick in the hospital with pneumonia. And I remember laying in the hospital room. I'll never forget the day, the time, the weather, anything like that. And it was July 17th, 2003. The doctor came in and he sat in front of me and he had the most serious look on his face. I knew in that moment that I was pregnant. I just knew it because what else would he tell me? And he looked at me and he says, you have pneumonia. And I'm like, yeah, they told me. And he said it. He said, I have something more serious to tell you. And then he said that I was HIV positive. In that moment, I felt like I was supposed to have like this dramatic reaction. But in reality, I truly did not know what HIV was, and I had no idea about the stigma associated with the virus. Thank goodness I was diagnosed in 2003, where there was no social media or anything like that, because even without that, I was certainly about to find out how stigma was. When the doctor left out the room, I picked up the phone and I began calling people. The first person I called was my best friend at the time, and she was at work. And I just came straight out and told her, girl, the doctors told me I'm HIV positive. I think I was looking for like some clarity or some guidance or, just somebody to really just tell me things were going to be okay. But she freaked out a little bit and she said, I'm at work. As soon as I get off work, I'm going to come and see you. And then the next person I called was another friend. She was 8 months pregnant at the time with my godchild. And I told her I was HIV positive. And she told me in that moment that she didn't want me to have anything to do with her or her child, that I was HIV positive. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? So the third person I called was my sister. She's a hairdresser in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm from. I had only been HIV positive for about 10 minutes. And I remember getting ready to tell her I was positive, and she told me that she had already found out. I had only told two people, and they told I telephone. So she told me she already knew, but my mom did not know, and it probably was best for it to come out of my mouth to tell my mom. So I called my aunt, who I had a closer relationship with, because I was scared to tell my mother. I was scared what she was going to say, how she was going to feel, anything, and I still really did not know what was going on. Luckily, when I called my aunt, she gave me a lot of information about HIV. And I kind of told her that I've told people and this, and I knew that it was no going back in that moment. So I called my mom, and my mom told me she didn't want me to tell anybody I had anything. And if they wanted to know what was wrong with me, just tell them that I had cancer. But I had already told four people prior to her. She really thought she was the first person I called. So that is how I found out what stigma was the same day I found out I was HIV positive. For a long time after my diagnosis, I felt HIV was what was going to kill me. I definitely wanted to die as the stigma was overwhelming. To be told that I have a virus now that I have to take medication for every single day. The guy who infected me actually told me he didn't want to have anything to do with me because I told too many people about the HIV, that I was HIV positive. So he didn't want to have nothing to do with me. And now I got to take these medications. My doctor telling me that I won't be able to afford if I drop out of college. I mean, I really, really had a lot going on. Until one day I almost died, and it had absolutely nothing to do with being HIV positive. I was involved in a car crash, and I definitely was not supposed to make it. And it was in that moment, and I think at this point it was about 9 months after my diagnosis, that I realized, despite the simple fact of being HIV positive, that I still had life. And I wanted to do something more with my life. I wanted to come to terms with who I was and what I had. So I decided that I was going to put my story in the Tennessean paper, which I had already was getting offers to do it because I played sports in high school when rumors were spreading, and friends of mine, parents worked at the paper and all these other things. I would set up appointments and I wouldn't go, or I wouldn't call. And after the car wreck, I decided that was what I was going to do. And when I tell my message, I definitely tell people to get tested because I never would have voluntarily went in to get an HIV test because I did not think it could happen to me. I did not think it was an issue of mine. And I think about it now, living with the virus for over 20 years. I would have found out when I would have gotten an AIDS diagnosis because there was no way I would have went in. So I'm very grateful for that. I also tell people to get educated because I had no idea. And I get it a lot. People always talk about, well, you must be promiscuous. And to get it, it's as if people think you don't get HIV from one person one time. They think you go to this person, get the H, this person get the I, this person get the V, and it comes together. And that's how you get it. And that's not how you get it. You get it from one person one time. So I can't express enough of getting tested, getting educated, because also within getting educated, that helps with stigma as well.
Marvelyn, thank you. Every time I hear your story, it's just so powerful, and I'm just so moved by the way in which, for the last how many years, you've been advocating now.
Well, I did take a break, like 6 years off.
Uh-huh. Oh
But
wow.
I mean, it's crazy, but I was kind of still advocating for my book and
Mm-hmm.
previous stories circulating online and things like that, but I took a personal step back.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been over 20 years.
Wow. And you, just to highlight some of the points, you were 19 when you were infected in Nashville, right?
Hmm.
And that really goes to underscore something. I believe it was Dr. Driffin who was sharing the epidemiology part of all of this, the demographics, when he talked about how HIV, how there are more diagnoses in the South, right? And we know the South has more Black folk living anywhere in the South more than anywhere else in the country. So being from Nashville, I think that really kind of helps to underscore that statistic. What happened? I know in your case, different states have different laws around criminalization, and criminalization is something that's deep, far, and vast.
Hmm.
We'll talk about another day. But just I'm just asking in your case. I know what happened in your case around the person who you acquired HIV from.
Well, when I originally found out I was HIV positive and I told him that I was, he told me that he was sorry. And I felt like at the time that we were finding out together that I was HIV positive. He told me he went to get a test. He told me his test was positive.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought at the time we both were finding out together that we were HIV positive. I just thought that due to the stigma and the simple fact of people knowing my status, he didn't even want people to think he had it, whether he had it or not. So I thought that's why he didn't want to have nothing to do with me. We still kept in communication throughout the year, but it wasn't until 2019, and I was diagnosed in 2002. It wasn't until then that I found out that he knowingly infected me with HIV and had knowingly infected over 20 women.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, Marvelyn. I want to begin by saying
I
you
can't hear
have,
your question. I can't hear you.
I want to begin right there. Can you hear
I
me?
can't hear you.
I
Can
don't know
can you
why.
hear
I can
me?
hear you.
You can hear Cece, but not Reverend Tracy.
Yes.
Okay, Trace, I don't know what you were going to ask. I can hear you. What were you going to ask, Tracy?
Can you hear me now?
She still can't, but I can. What were you going to ask?
I wanted to first tell her how she's a hero to me for her courage in um, confronting the whole journey. The reason that I would have you come to the church to talk is because you are an example of what it means to live despite a diagnosis. And this was a long time before we had the advancements we have now. Your
Yeah.
book, The Naked Truth, is an important book that I recommend that people get.
Okay,
And
so
I want,
hold on, Marvelyn. So I'm gonna tell you what Tracy's saying because you can't hear. She was
Okay.
that that some years ago you would come to the church. She would do these events around HIV/AIDS awareness, and you would
Hmm.
come to her church, and how inspirational you always were, because you were a great example of someone who was really living with HIV, and how powerful your book has been in inspiring her and others. Tracy, what's the name of the book again? The Naked Truth?
Naked Truth.
Okay, Naked
Naked Truth.
Truth.
And maybe you've written other books since then. Can you hear me now?
No, she can't hear
Oh,
you. Have you
I
written
I
still can't.
have you written other books since, or you still just working on Naked Truth?
No, The Naked Truth is the only book I wrote. It was my autobiography. There may be or maybe not be part two.
Okay.
But as of now, it's only The Naked Truth, Young, Beautiful, and HIV positive.
so
Okay.
the question I want to ask her, Cece, is what would she tell her 19-year-old self today?
What would you tell Reverend Tracy's asking, what would you tell your 19-year-old self today?
I would, I mean, it's crazy because I don't live with regrets. Honestly, it's more scary for me life without HIV
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I listened to Dr. Dyson and Dr. Daniel as they were speaking. And one thing they did mention was at 19, I didn't love myself. You could have gave me every resource, you could have gave me every education, all these things, but if I did not feel valued enough
Mm-hmm.
or to know who I would set myself up for failure anyway. HIV taught me that. It gave me a reason to live and to care about life.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what I would tell my 19-year-old self. I would just tell her to buckle up because I literally learned so many lessons. And HIV is like a gift and a curse in a way. It's still very hard to live with, even now. I still face stigma and I face rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult, but it has weeded so many negative people out of my life. It has shown me purpose and all these things. Not to say like it's just great, wonderful thing, but for me, it's what I needed.
I understand. Marvin, I put a pin in it. I want you to stay right there. Tracy, you want to bring up our other folks to join our next panel with Marvelyn? We're going to be talking about specifically about a lot that we've already touched on, but Black women and HIV, saving ourselves.
Absolutely. We want to ask Reverend Nancy Kingwood to join us at this time. And I see Latasha Brown is already on the stage. And I think we have one more person coming back. Dr. Dyson is coming back as well.
Yep, Dr. Dyson is coming back. Reverend Nancy Kingwood, Latasha Brown. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Go ahead, Trace.
Just a little bit about Reverend Nancy Kingwood is a faith leader and health advocate committed to addressing trauma, stigma, and health inequities in the Black community. She's also a dynamic preacher. I want y'all to know that piece too. And a lot of other things we could say. And Latasha Brown probably does not have a voice because she has been on the front lines for the last month, making sure that we were not in the stores on Black Friday. Thank you for that effort.
Yes.
And Dr. Latasha is always advocating for us, whether it's about voting rights, whether it's about economic justice, whether it's about community empowerment. She does it all. And so we're grateful to welcome you all into this platform and conversation as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I'm so inspired, Marvelyn. I'm convinced I'm your cousin.
Okay, hold on, guys. Marvelyn is having a hard time hearing everybody but me. Marvelyn, you can still hear me,
I
right?
can only hear you. Should I go out and try to come back in?
You can go out and try to come back in, but go ahead, Latasha. I know that your time, because you are out here fighting power, I know that your time is limited, but so go ahead and what we're going to say.
I just wanted to offer, it was so wonderful to hear that, sister. And I want us to, really think about one of the things that was shocking to me. And I'm really honored to be on this panel with the other sisters that are here. I think it's so important for us to really realize as Black women around this is a crisis for us and in our communities. And so we're not talking about it. I remember, being at an event that Gilead had a couple of years ago, I think like 2 years ago, and saw that 58% of new cases were Black women. I was like, that can't be possible. Like it's just, that's impossible, that we're only 12-13% of the population. What is happening, right? And so there is a crisis. And I think part of the crisis is resulting from, our silence around this issue, that that's why I think what Marvelyn, you having the courage to share your story, to tell, I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful and inspired by your story, right? And I think many other young women and people to think, because nobody thinks that it could be me, that it will happen to me, right? And oftentimes folks don't even really understand the full totality of the risk. We're not thinking around, as you were saying, this is a brother that you were feeling. Like this was somebody that you actually were in love with. And so we make choices all the time. So anybody that said that they have not made a choice, right, based on their emotion, their care for somebody else, you're just not being honest. The truth of the matter is all of us have been in circumstances, right, that we have taken risk. And I'm hoping that with more information, just as you shared, with more information, right, as we're talking about this, we have made this taboo. We're not talking about it in our churches, our places of faith. It's also a result of sexism as well. And I'll say the reason why I'm raising this is because even in terms of our sexuality, sexual health, and even our sexual behavior, women, I know as I was growing up, I never heard the women in my family talk about that. The only thing they would say is don't get pregnant, right? You know, which is part
But
of
they
what
wouldn't even tell you how to get pregnant.
they didn't even tell you how to get pregnant, right?
They would say,
You know,
don't get
well,
pregnant.
I don't know.
But you had to figure out how you could get pregnant in the first place.
Listen,
I never got pregnant.
One day, my grandparents told me, I said, well, how you get pregnant? They said, if you look at a boy. I said, for real? I said, if a boy touch you, you get pregnant. I said, for real? So I say that to say, I'm saying that in jest, but I think seriously, this is a moment for us to really, on this day, to actually lift up the stories of the sisters who are in our communities that have been leading on this issue. This is the day for us to actually make a commitment to have these conversations in our circles, in our networks, like for us to destigmatize how this is impacting us in our communities. And I think the third thing for us to say is really important for us to really be on the front lines of the fight and demand that there are health services for folks, right, who have that. Right now we are in a big health fight. We can't separate that with what is going on now. We can't separate the politics. The truth of the matter is we have to demand that we have healthcare access for all folks, right? That we have to demand that there's not cuts in Medicaid. And we're going to have to fight like heaven. I'll just say that because I got my pastors on here. We're going to have to fight, you know, but y'all say hell. We can say we got to fight like hell, right? to push back on this. And so I'll just stop there because I know the other sisters want to share, and I know that I have to leave soon. Today starts off the kickoff of the 70th anniversary commemoration of the Montgomery bus boycott. That our people have always, in the space of things that have been hard, we have always had the moral consciousness and the fortitude to stand in that space. And so I'm hoping on this day that we're embracing our brothers and sisters who are on the front lines dealing with this, and the families that are dealing with this, and recommit ourselves as a community to take this on as a critical issue.
So let's go a little bit further than the hell piece and say that those of us who are people of faith, and there are many on this call, we say that everything God created is good.
That's right.
So that means that sex is good, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to let that sit there. It's not just good, it's good.
It's good.
And yet we don't talk about it in our religious institutions.
That's right.
We don't talk about sex being holy, sex being healthy, sex being God's plan for release.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we change from making this just about HIV to it being about living full, holy, sexually active lives? Because God made it, and it's holy.
Yeah.
The whole word. I don't have nothing to say to that. Nothing in the world, but that's a word I'm gonna sit with. I tell you that much. Latasha, I want to thank you. I know you got to run. I want to thank you so much for coming on here and preaching. If we had time, we'd ask you to sing a song, but we'll bring you back to sing a song another day. All right. All right.
Thank you, sisters. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll pick up on what Reverend Blackman said though around conversation. Why don't we talk about sex in a different way? And I think, Reverend Cece, you and I talked about this before when we met, and I talked about the work that we did with the Black Women's Working Group around risk to reason, shifting the language. So we always have talked about sex, HIV, and STIs in a risk-based way. And that goes back, Reverend Blackman, about that the health language that we use, right? We talk about what's your risk. But if you don't see yourself at risk, because who in their mind thinks that sex is risky, right? Like that's just pleasure. So you have to shift that language. And that's what the Black Women's Working Group to reframe risk taught us. was that we need to shift the language and talk about reasons that HIV prevention, sexual health and wellness, like start there, why that's important for us and why we should have those conversations. And embedded in that is talking about pleasure, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
sex should be pleasurable for you. And like it's okay to have that conversation. It's okay to expect that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about agency, right? And reclaiming our agency, right? Reclaiming our bodies and being able to like decide for ourselves around our sexual health and wellness. And so that was some of that work to kind of shift that language to then be able to pick up a conversation around sexual health and wellness and then pick up a conversation around STI prevention and HIV prevention, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't have those kinds of conversations and talk about pleasure, intimacy, right? Like, sex, then we can't get to, the rest of it. Like we can't get there. So we have to, pick that up and shift the way we talk about and think about sexual health and wellness.
That's good. I want to bring Reverend Nancy into this conversation. Reverend Nancy is my mentor in HIV and
I can't hear.
work. And Marvelyn, can you hear us? Marvelyn, can you hear us?
You can't
No?
hear you now.
Okay.
I can
Oh,
only hear you now.
oh, okay. I'm turning over to Reverend Nancy. Reverend Nancy, you've been in this
I
work
have no idea what's going on.
for
Every
many.
time when somebody leaves or come in, I can't hear.
Okay, all right. We'll turn it over to Reverend Nancy, who's been in this work for many,
I'll
many
just leave and come
years.
back again.
Okay. Reverend Nancy, can you tell us just a little bit about how you got, as a Black woman, how you got into HIV advocacy and a little bit about what your work entails?
Sure. And thank you so much for the invitation to come on and share tonight. I started my work in HIV about over 30 years ago. I was working for an FQHC, a health center. An opportunity presented itself for me to move over from the Department of Social Services into the HIV department. I was certified by the state of Connecticut to offer HIV testing. And at that time, it was a blood draw. We had to wait maybe 2 or 3 weeks for results to come in. And so one of the things that drew me and kept me in this work is as I moved forward in this field, I started seeing more and more people test positive that looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked around for resources or some community support, it wasn't there. And so from moving past, working for the health center, I then went to GBAP, GBAPP, which now I'm serving as the executive director. And Cece, you know this, you were in the NE Alliance.
Yes, I was.
A curriculum for Black women to raise awareness so we would know our risk factors, so we would understand the language. We have to be at the table. We have to be at the table where decision makers are. And that's one of the things that I just didn't see. So how then could we help women, help empower women to share our stories, but also shift the narrative?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we wait for other people to tell our story and to shift our narrative, nobody could tell our story like we can.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so the NE Alliance gave a platform in which Black women could come together, that we can share, that we could take down the mask to say, yep, I was really feeling him, but this is what happened.
Mhm.
And now that I have information, I know it's okay to say no, or now I know how to put on a condom. And yes, we taught women how to put on a condom even with their mouths.
I remember that. Yes, let me tell you something. The NEA Alliance trained us well, because I know after that training, I was in churches and Bible studies with cucumbers and bananas.
Yes.
Telling women how to put on condoms. NEA Alliance was a real deal. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that just gave birth to something that wasn't already in existence in the community. And we have trained over 150 Black women in the NEA Alliance. And then, I had to write a curriculum because the brothers was like, this is for women. What about us? I wrote another curriculum. But also, even now, we are funded by the AIDS Alliance for Women and Infants and Youth and Children by Dr. Ivy Turnbull, for Roots and Rhythms. Roots and Rhythms, we meet the second Saturday of the month, and it's centering our voices and providing a safe and what I call a sacred space for women just to be women, for us to share, for us to address our traumas, for us to just talk about things that we don't talk about. To date, GBAP has successfully recruited and engaged over 80 houses of worship when it comes to HIV. And that was then. And then I asked the question, where are we now?
Right. Where are we now? And I know in a little while, Reverend Nancy, you're going to be joining us to talk about the role of the Black church. I know you have a whole lot to say because so much of your work has been about awakening the Black church in this work. And so we're gonna hold that conversation for a little bit later. But I wanted to ask the both of you this, and this question, and I want to get to some of the questions that I also see in the chat over here. I want y'all to know I see y'all in the comments. One of the questions is about older Black women acquiring HIV, right? And maybe why that is. Are there different, I don't know, circumstances? Are they different? What's the word, Dr. Dyson? I want to say risk factors, but is there a better way to say that?
Yeah, we just say reasons, or what are things that potentially could make someone particularly vulnerable, right?
Okay, what are some of that? So I want to ask, what are some of the vulnerabilities specifically with older Black women? But I also want to address this because I saw somebody put it in the comments, and I know that this can be triggering and stigmatizing. So forgive me, work with me with language and everything here. But 20 years ago, we were talking about down low, right? Men who sleep with men, and the reasons or vulnerabilities that causes for Black women. There was a documentary that ABC put out in 2006 that talked about the factors, right? And one of those was that the incarceration rates, that Black men oftentimes go into prison negative and come out of prison positive. Also, we understand that there are Black women who acquire HIV from men who have sex with men who have not disclosed their sexual history or preferences with these women. So I really want to address those two things. So I'm gonna put all that on the table. So talk to us about older Black women and men who have sex with men and the risk for Black women.
Sure. So I can start with the first one around older Black women. I have seen that question come up a couple of times. And so I saw Dr. Driffin drop in some resources to go and look at the data. But we do see, new HIV diagnoses among folks over the age of 50, right? They account for a quarter of new HIV diagnoses every year. And so it's not something that is, uncommon, right, for us to see that. And then obviously women are included in that number. And so particularly some of the vulnerabilities, we've talked about some of it already, right? We heard when we had the conversation with growing up, it was like, don't get pregnant, don't bring any babies home. Well, if I've gone through menopause and I can't bring a baby home, right? Like that piece, if that's all I know, I'm not thinking about that anymore. And I may not be thinking about the potential for STIs, and that contracting an HIV, STI, or being diagnosed with a new HIV, with a new STI. So that's a part of it. The other thing we have to remember is like going through perimenopause, menopause, that vaginal dryness that's there. And if we're not having that conversation with our, healthcare provider, that causes, right, like some dryness and can cause friction there and can cause vaginal tearing, right? And so then you have now open wound and you have potential for, again, higher potential for transmission of HIV in that space. And so that's something we have to have conversations around. And then we just have to, think about it. There are increased numbers of STI diagnoses in assisted living facilities, nursing homes, right? And that's because, well, it's a confined space. There's only so many people in the space, right? Like there's only, so many people that you can interact with and have relations with. And so therefore, there's just the chance that we do see higher STI rates that are happening there, right? I had somebody have a conversation and share, a particular experience here. I live in Montgomery, and so they were talking about, the men who were there. Sometimes they get their social security check, right? And so the young girls are coming, and they're like, "Oh, it's the first of the month. He's getting a social security check," and they're, interacting with different older men because of that reason. And so they're bringing in whatever, whatever's happening, any STIs that they may have been diagnosed with, right? And so there's all of these factors that are happening that could be contributing to this vulnerability that you see in folks who are older, right? So that's the first piece. I think the second piece around down low and men who have sex with men and things like that. The one thing that I think you and I talked about is there's often been this thought that that's how women who are living with HIV are contracting HIV overwhelmingly, is because there's a man who's on the down low who is having sex with women also, and that's not the case. There's plenty of data to show us that the majority, overwhelming majority, are in cases where the man is in a heterosexual relationship, right? And so the things that, I was just at a conference with a panel, and a young lady, a woman was there, and she was talking about she contracted HIV from her husband, and her husband was a past IV drug user, right? It had nothing to do with his sexual practices. It had everything to do with something else. And that's not been tested before, and didn't know he was living with HIV, and they got married, and she contracted HIV as well. She was diagnosed with HIV. It had everything to do with his IV drug use, nothing to do with, him, sleeping with other men. Now, there are instances where there are men who are, having sex with men, and they don't identify, right, like as gay. That's why we use the term and we say MSM. And so there could be, different ways that they are engaging in having sex with men. They may not be, we hear all the time sometimes where they really say, I'm not on the receiving end, I'm not the receptive partner, right? So they don't identify, see themselves as gay. They have sex with men, right? But they don't receive, they're not receptive, right? And so they feel like that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And they still like women. And so, those are some of the things that happen, and we have to have those conversations. But I think that that's the key, is having a conversation, being able to understand what are people's sexual preferences, how are they having sex. I always say when I have this conversation, what goes where and who does what, right? And that way we don't have to get into, all of the labels, right? I just want to understand what the particular vulnerabilities could be, right? Based off of what's going on in your life, right? And that's a non-judgmental way to have that conversation. What goes where and who does what.
So I also go ahead, Reverend Nancy.
I just want to jump in also and say some of the older women don't ask questions. Right? We don't have the conversation around sex. We don't have the conversation to say, where you been last night? We don't have the conversation sometimes to say, let us both go get a test. And I think when through the NEA Alliance and through Roots and Rhythms and just my experience, we're working with Black women throughout all ages. That's what I find the most, that some of the older women don't realize they have agency, don't realize, and they don't have the language to have these conversations. And so I just wanted to add that too as another layer or another barrier to why HIV is also showing up in older Black women.
I want to amen that as in my pastoral experience. I met older women who have been married decades and have never seen their husband naked. Now, you can think what you want to think about that, but it happens because of the tradition, right? And I also want to say, I've been thinking a lot about these terms like down low and men who have sex with men. And I think that the church has to take some responsibility for that, some accountability. If you cannot be who you are, then you do the best you can, because you still are who you are, right? And so the church needs some training and some education and some walking with to stop shaming people for who they love and for how they have sex. Sex is fluid. Sexuality is fluid. And if we stopped having to hide who we are, to be acceptable, especially in the Black church. I'm just going to say that. And there's been studies that suggest that is tied to enslavement, that we try our best because our bodies were used for shame. We try our best to be respectable, right? But we have a lot of agency in the church to shift this conversation to a healthy conversation where it's not just about, and I'm not trying to take the emphasis off of HIV tonight. That's not what I'm saying. But if we were seeking just healthy sexual life, then that becomes less stigmatized as one of the things that we are protecting ourselves from. And if we allow people, whether it's how whatever gender you express, if we make space for the diversity of
Yeah.
sexual expression and sexuality, then we might be able to begin to have more transparency about things, right? I'm going to say this one thing. I know we're running out of time, but I talked about Marvelyn coming to the church. And one of the reasons I stopped doing it, I'm saying this for mothers that are out there. I used to have a conference every year for mothers and daughters, for mothers to learn how to talk to their daughters and daughters to learn how to talk to their mothers. And I would have groupies at this conference. Every year they would come. Every year we would have this conversation. And I looked up one year and they were all pregnant. Now they didn't have HIV, but they still were practicing behaviors that were not safe. And it occurred to me that sometimes we have to break it down a different way. HIV is not the enemy. What we want is healthy sexual lives. I'm looking at you two because you know more about that than I do. I'm just saying, if we make it just about not becoming positive, that's just like making it about not getting pregnant.
Yeah,
That doesn't keep people from engaging in risky behavior. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
absolutely.
Oh,
There's that intersectionality, right? That's why we always talk about, sexual and reproductive health, right? Like, because that's what it is. It's all wrapped into one conversation for sure.
Absolutely. We got to move on because we got two more segments we're going to be talking about. We're talking about policy, advocacy, and power, and the role of the Black church. Before we do that, I just want to go back. Dr. Dyson, at the very beginning, you told us that people can acquire HIV through blood. Somebody in the comments asked, "Is that mean needles?" Yes, it means blood, however you come in contact with blood. So definitely through needles. It gets acquired through semen, through rectal fluid, through breast milk, through vaginal fluid, and again, needles because of blood contact. So somebody's also asking about PrEP, and I really appreciate how Dr. Driffin is and others are in the comments educating each other. And this is what we're going to have to do once we leave this, once we get out of the chat in the comments. We're going to have to take this information back to our communities, because do y'all know that for the first time since 1988, the White House is not even acknowledging World AIDS Day today? Not even acknowledging. No federal public official is allowed today to speak at and participate in World Day events across this country. So that's since 1988. We've never done that. Okay. So if we've ever needed another wake up call, I think we've had quite a few. But if we needed another one, here it is, right? Nobody is coming to save us.
that's right.
We have to save ourselves. Reverend Nancy, give me in one sentence, what do you want Black women to know?
That you're beautiful and you're worth it. Get tested and know your status. Monogamy is a word, it's not an act. You can't base I know this is more than one word. You can't base your HIV status off someone else's behavior and their responses. You have agency.
Take responsibility. That's right. Everybody across the screen, you can go to hiv.org to find in your zip code where you can get tested. You can go to takemehome.org. I think it is takemehome.org to get a free test mailed to your house where you can do self-testing. Take advantage of all of these things that are rolling across the bottom of your screen. Pastor Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off into policy, advocacy, and power.
Come on, everybody. Let's appreciate these amazing voices so far. We have another couple segments to go that are going to keep bringing up more voices. And we want you, all of you that are watching, I believe they told me we have over 150 or so folks watching through the actual StreamYard link. We did finally get the live streams up on Facebook and on YouTube. And so for the last 30-minute segment, we want to invite you, everyone who's watching, all 150 plus of you, go right now to your Facebook page, go right now to your YouTube page, and share this link with someone. We want to make sure that everyone can join this conversation, everyone can join this consciousness raising, this challenging, this educating conversation about how we can reduce all the stigma, how we can embrace and love those who are living with HIV and AIDS, how we can make sure that we change our own vocabulary, our own practices. The scripture says that faith comes by hearing, and so you have to hear it. You have to be open to hearing something differently. And so I'm inviting you to go to Black Doctors org page on Facebook. Go to Live Free's Facebook page, or you yourself tap in with your YouTube channel and literally text this link to 10 folks that you know. But let's not allow the next 30 minutes of very important conversation to be lost on so many folks who we know need to hear this information. And we are also going to rebroadcast the entirety of this program at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm sorry, 7 p.m. Pacific Time. And then we'll rebroadcast it again tomorrow on the off platforms just to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to see and hear this information. Dr. Dyson, thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Kingwood, thank you so much. I think we're about to bring up our next round of participants as we talk about advocacy, policy, and power building. I'm going to ask Reverend Cece to stay on with me here. We have Pamela Price, who is a leader dedicated to uplifting women, families, and youth through health education. She is the Deputy Director at Balm in Gilead. We have the amazing, magnanimous Dr. Daniel Driffin, who I got a chance to hang out with last week, and he's a nationally recognized HIV advocate whose work bridges science, policy, and community empowerment. And he re-educated me in about 30 minutes on my life as related to this work on Instagram. And so I encourage y'all to go check that out if y'all want to hear from this wonderful, wonderful brother. And super excited to have Reverend Kimberly Williams joining us as well to help us talk about these issues. She's a pastor and counselor committed to holistic ministry, grounded in healing, mental health, and community care. Let's start with you, Dr. Driffin. Now, you've heard a whole lot, and I know the conversation. Oh, do we have Kimberly Williams, Reverend Kimberly Williams? She's not made it onto the screen. Hopefully, we haven't lost her in the backstage, but if so, just add her as soon as she's able. Dr. Driffin, I just want to come straight to you real quick. You've heard a lot, and we've talked about a lot. Just level set with us. What are you hearing? What are you feeling as relates to what you've heard? We are in a moment, as Reverend Cece has stated to us, where disinformation or lack of information, or dare I say no information, seems to be the plight in this conversation. I recall you mentioning that even some of the data that's being promoted on social media about this being a massive epidemic exploding all across places like Houston. We got all kind of just misinformation and disinformation that's being magnified with no information. What would you just offer to us just as a start of this next segment to just help us level set a little bit around the policy, advocacy, power building necessary to get us moving forward?
Well, certainly. Again, I'm happy to share space with our new panelists. I think first off, it's truly making it make sense to everyone that policy touches all of our lives. Okay, let me start that up. Let me start that again. All policy is local politics, okay? From drinking water to stopping at a red light to having sidewalks in your neighborhood to being able to get to a medical provider within a 10-minute commute. Like all of this goes back to policy. And when we think about again HIV, it's what we started the conversation with. HIV is a social justice issue. And again, we had the conversation briefly around criminal HIV criminalization, right? And that's just laws that criminalize the transmission, exposure, or even non-disclosure of HIV. Again, when we think about criminalization, it is not rooted in science, number one. Okay. Number two, it pushes people again from care that will save your life. It also pushes people from prevention techniques that could, maintain the HIV status that you are aiming for. We still see close to 33 states, 33 of the 50 states have some version of a law that makes it illegal or connects it to jail time at the intersection of HIV and STIs, or even hepatitis in most cases. So again, I just start off with policy touches all of our lives, no matter what you think, no matter if you're participating or not participating. Like policy is still impacting our lives.
And that policy does require some specialization, right? Some targeted interventions. I've always, been trained that universal strategies don't create universal results, that people that are situated differently in the world. We've heard a lot about Black women. You mentioned earlier about the numerical numbers though related to Black men, and we can go deep and down the well around the stigma related to gay black men, and all of the ways in which that conversation is not as present in every sector as it should be. What would you say about urgent policy wins that are necessary to protect all of the most vulnerable populations while not also erasing or forgetting about Black men who are living with HIV and AIDS needing some continued attention as well?
Absolutely. Again, it truly goes back to the fact that when we had the option, when states had the option to expand Medicaid, many did not. We still see, the highest number of non-Medicaid expanded states are in the Deep South, those exact places where Black people live. So again, if you do not have access to provide healthcare coverage, you are less likely to be on a prevention tool like PrEP or PEP, and you are less likely to be on, HIV treatment. We do have federal programs specifically for treatment across the nation in the version of the Ryan White Care programs. But again, we still see how many people who are just unknowing about the care programs that you can, get more times than not free of charge or sliding scales. But then that goes to how far is my doctor's office?
Hmm.
I started HIV treatment in South Carolina. My physician office was an hour and a half. Now I live in Atlanta. My doctor's office is 15 minutes away. It's a lot easier to get to your doctor's office if it's 15 minutes versus an hour and a half. I have a privilege of having my own vehicle. So it's a lot easier to maintain my appointments using my own vehicle versus using the public transit system or even ride shares. We see people in Atlanta, that usually have to take a 2.5 to 3 hour bus ride to make their appointment. So imagine if you have to wake up 6 o'clock in the morning to make a 9:30 appointment and you walk in late because no bus system I know work on time, but you are then presented, with barriers of, oh, you're more than 15 minutes late, so you have to reschedule your appointment. We see people, especially people living with HIV, if they miss that appointment, they will not likely be undetectable by the year's end.
Hmm.
So again, it's a cyclical process. The same thing that happens in Atlanta happens in Jackson, it happens in Richmond, it happens in, Kansas City. So all of these things truly just what we know as syndemics, but it just multiplies the negative impact of living with HIV or even staying protected from HIV.
Thank you for that. We were fighting against this
Can
big.
y'all hear Reverend CC?
Y'all hear me? Okay.
Okay.
We were fighting against this big ugly bill for some weeks, right? And one of my big concerns was how this particular policy was going to impact people living with HIV. Reverend Kimberly, I think on Instagram, maybe even today, that Choose Healthy Life had maybe a Capitol Hill Day recently. And so I'm wondering if you're the executive director of Choose Healthy Life that's done so much amazing national work across this country for so long regarding HIV and other health issues in the Black community. Tell us about policy. Tell us about what you all are most concerned about and what you're advocating for in terms of HIV.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be on this evening. I think one of the things that's most important when we talk about policy and how we ensure that it's effective, it requires that we build it around the lived experiences of what's happening within our communities. And so you have to be willing to create channels for the community members and that help to advise for the right type of policy and the programs that need to be in place to ensure those solutions. And I think that, you lifted something, and I want to lean because Deborah Fraser House, who was our founder, who created BLACA, it was the Black Leadership Commission on AIDS, did a ton of work ensuring that the advocacy was built by bringing together those clergy members who were seeing on the front line what was happening in their communities, and they were willing to have these conversations on the ground by those that were being impacted by it. And I think one of the most important things that we have to continue to do when we're advocating for policy work is including all of the voices that need to be at the table to put together effective policy that impacts our communities and in the spaces and places where we live. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is we were very impactful through that partnership of our past co-chair, Reverend Calvin Butts and TD Jakes, in ensuring that the millions of dollars that went into place to support Black communities around HIV AIDS, they were instrumental in that work. And that money that funded the AIDS work was in place from 1998 until this current administration. And so I think it has to be that braided infrastructure of including clergy, of including the lived experiences of our community, and then our Capitol Hill, having those partnerships with our senators, our Congress folks, and all of the people that can help us move that forward is critical in ensuring that the policy is designed to help the folks that need the policy in place. And so that would be my advice, is that we continue to have these conversations that include the voices that are impacted by this work at the table when we're writing policy and designing it for our community.
So good. Thank you for that. Pamela, you are Deputy Director of Balm and Gilead, and Balm and Gilead as well has been around a long time. Dr. Panessa Steele, I believe she was the founder. You all have been at the front lines for a long time around this, and so we really want to recognize and honor you all's great work. I know your particular passion, I mean, you got passion around all of this, right? But you have a real heart around youth and HIV. And so we know that Black youth represent over half of new HIV infections among young people. And maybe, Dr. Drippin, you can kind of give us some of those numbers, like between the ages of what and what. Do you know that offhand, Dr. Drippin?
I'll pull it up while Miss Price begins the
Okay,
conversation.
cool. So my question to you, Pamela, is how do we get more Black young adults, Black youth engaged in HIV policy and advocacy work?
I think one is to piggyback a little bit off of what Reverend Williams just said. Like policy and advocacy go hand in hand, but there's also a piece that must connect those, and that's the education. So we don't actually educate our communities, let alone our youth, around what is policy versus what is politics. How does legislation actually work at all levels? Like we don't educate on the distinction between big P's and little P's, right? Little P's is the devil in the details, that when we have legislation that gets passed, but we don't think about, to Reverend Williams' point, how is this actually going to help the individual with lived experience? Yeah. So one of the things that we have really failed our young people is they don't even know how to navigate this crackerjack healthcare system. So that's one. And then when we add in the fact of policies like Title 10, Title 10, most people hammer Title 10 for being the family care and the abortion legislation, not realizing that the freezing of Title 10 and possibly what will be the complete elimination of Title 10 just actually impacts our young people. Because in states now where a 13 or 14-year-old who knows, let's say they're sexually active for whatever reason, like why is not the issue. I know our churches want to get, but that's not the issue. If they are sexually active, we now must act accordingly. And Title 10 gives those protections for these teens to be able to go into these community healthcare centers and get the testing and possible treatment that they need without needing that parental consent. And I know I'm a parent and I work in both state health departments and city health departments. And I can tell you that even as a parent, while I would want my child to come to me and let me know and let us have this conversation and let's do this together, the majority of our homes are not built and designed that way. Our parents aren't equipped with the language and information that they need to have, no one in our community, well, I don't say no one, not enough of us in our communities have the language, let alone, I think they even desire to want to have these hard conversations with our young people.
Absolutely.
We want to tell them what to do, but not give them the how.
That's right.
And so I think that's one of the biggest issues we have right now with young people. And we've got to really dig deep and really be more intentional about how we educate them around these policy and advocacy conversations.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in right here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I love that Miss Price just brought up this situation. I hope my mom and dad's not watching tonight. But this actually came up recently in our own household, you know. So like my father and youngest brother share the same name. One's a senior, one's a junior, but they usually don't delineate that. So a medical bill came home and it showed an STI test being done, you know. And my mother, who opens all the mail in the house, regardless of what name is on it. She's the CEO of the home, so she sees everything. You know, but it lifted up a conversation on what's going on and like, you know, all those things. I think for me, you know, as a public health advocate, you know, I said, this is a great thing. You know, like the fact that my youngest brother, sexually active or not, you know, he has connections to a healthier sexual like situation. You
Yeah.
know, I think of the fact of, you know, my situation at that time, you know, not having that space, you know, to have a conversation of what does it mean to be healthy, especially at that intersection of, you know, having sex. So again, I think, you know, we have to make policy sexy for everyone. You know, I can't tell you the number of people, regardless of age, you know, who are not comfortable in communicating with their medical providers or even the nurse or, you know, a community health worker, you know, but we have things in place explicitly as a result of the Affordable Care Act to really help marginalized communities navigate these systems much better.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
would you not agree that just real quick, you mentioned the Affordable Care Act, speaking about a big policy thing that's up for grabs. The elimination of that, this stuff being up for grabs, it's a whole nother part of our advocacy that we need to center in our conversation. Um, I had not thought about that till we had our Instagram live. Can you just say a quick word about the ways in which the Affordable Care Act really helps make this so accessible to folks, and another important reason why we need to keep advocating to improve it without dismantling it?
Yeah, most certainly. So I like to remind everyone, you know, the official name of the congressional act is PPACA, right? And that PP is Patient Protections in the Affordable Care Act, right? And that actually placed in many protections around the expansion of Medicaid, you know, to not only include like key health services that we didn't, you know, provide individuals, but also, you know, truly stopping the discrimination of individuals with pre-existing conditions. You know, when we think about people living with HIV, close to 40, if not 45% of folks receiving health care coverage living with HIV receive it through Medicaid. You know,
Mhm.
so this $1 trillion that's being wiped off of our books as a result of the big ugly bill, you know, it is attacking those expansions of services that Medicaid provided. You know, this premium, this expanded premium tax credit issue. Again, you know, we brought a close to 20 additional million people to healthcare services as a result of COVID. You know, we were paying for premiums. That money, when that money goes away, if that money goes away, you know, individuals will not be able to pay the increase of premiums. You know, right now we still have things in place to provide care, but again, this is a everyday changing situation. You know, so we
Dr.
all have to pay attention.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We've got to go to the other. This is so much information we need to know. This thing needs to be like a half day or something. But hang tight. We need to move on to the role of the Black church, which I think feeds into all of this: advocacy, power building, all of that for the Black community. I asked you. You took the time to dig up that statistic around youth. Can you give us that really quick?
Yeah, so between 13 and 24, there were roughly 6,400 new diagnoses. And again, you know, we have to remember that as we get to those smaller numbers, the data will be protected just to protect confidentiality. But again, we see more than 6,000 cases, so more work is necessary for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. We're going to keep Pam up. We're going to keep Reverend Kimberly up. Can you bring up Reverend Justin? Who else do we have? Reverend Nancy. And then I think that's it. Reverend Justin, Reverend Nancy, are you all there? And Tracy, I know you were so kind to bring Reverend Justin to our awareness about the book that he's written, all that. So I want to turn it to you to introduce him. We know everyone else on the screen.
Right. Reverend Justin is an advocate for HIV awareness and health. He's a faith leader. He's an author. He recently published a book dedicated to creating belonging and safety and justice for people living with HIV and AIDS within the Black church. And I think that's something we need to talk more about tonight. So we welcome you to this panel, uh, Dr. Shamel, and hopefully we'll be able to leave here with some things that we can do to help in this crisis. I want to just throw out a question to any of you who want to answer. How has the Black church historically engaged in HIV work, and how has that role evolved, if it's evolved?
Well, first of all, Reverend Tracy and Reverend CC, thank you for extending the invitation for me to participate on this evening. To answer the question, unfortunately, the Black church has really remained silent from the beginning. There have been a few pastors and congregations who opened up their doors, who started ministries, who started providing assistance to individuals who are living with the virus and also who are living with AIDS. But be honest, the Black church as a whole has been silent since 1981 until 2025. They are still silent. And that's what really kind of caused me to write this book based on my personal experience. That once I was diagnosed with HIV as a clergy, I kept it quiet because I did not want to be abandoned by the church. And for 15 years, I really kept that quiet because I didn't, like I said, didn't want to be abandoned by the church. And it wasn't until I was in the Doctor of Ministry program at United that I started thinking about, if I'm keeping quiet, who else is also remaining quiet? Who else is suffering in silence? And I even talked with a clergy about doing this project, and he said, "Why would you want to do something like that? Don't you know you'd be known as the HIV pastor, a preacher? You'll never get a church." And for 5 minutes, I thought about it, and I said, "He's right." But then the Spirit of the Lord said, "No, he's wrong. That's the reason why you need to do that." And so my project was on HIV and AIDS, about why individuals keep their status quiet, and then also when they share their status, what is the response that they receive? And it was mixed. Some was positive, some was negative. And in the book that I talk about, the reason why churches don't want to talk about HIV and AIDS, because they don't want to talk about sex. Because when you talk about sex, it has to include sex outside of marriage. It has to include the side pieces. The extramarital affairs, the rape, the molestation, and unfortunately, the church do not want to talk about that. So since they don't want to talk about sex, they don't want to talk about HIV and AIDS, and that's the reason why still today the church has been silent.
Reverend Nancy, you've done a lot of work. Pamela, you've done a lot of work. Reverend Kimberly, your organization has done a lot of work in the Black church to get the Black church engaged. I would love to hear you all's response to the question as well. Reverend Nancy?
I think many of the churches that we have engaged around HIV came by way of relationships. It's not necessarily that they wanted the information. It was I had to build relationships and trust, which was time consuming. It was very time consuming. And to build trust to a level where they would trust me with their congregation. And I also learned through this journey as well that some of the pastors and other clergy were not equipped. I went in there with a certain expectation that they were just going to talk about it. And then I realized, wait a minute, we have to do HIV 101. We have to do some education with the clergy in closed door sessions. And so we did work with Deborah Levine, and we worked with Mblaka. We brought Dr. Butts to Bridgeport, to Mount Airy, and we had a closed door session with clergy. Partnered with the Balm in Gilead. And what helped us was a week of prayer for the healing of AIDS. I mean, because then now you're talking language around prayer, right? But also we needed to do the education with the clergy. And, I've been escorted out of a few beautiful churches, only to receive calls later that someone in their congregation or even their family was living with HIV and they needed help. And of course, they encountered barriers to care and things like that. And so again, it was for us about building these relationships, but it was building the relationships, but where it came to sustaining the relationships was challenging. I didn't have dedicated staff. I didn't have the capacity within the organization just to continue to work with churches. And now in 2025, Department of Public Health, I get a call. They want to now engage clergy in Fairfield County where we're located. And so some churches embraced it for a while. Others embraced it for World AIDS Day, only for us not to go back for another 12 months for World AIDS Day to say that they've done something. It hasn't always been an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
Good.
Before the next person answers, I want to address the question that Tracy Dooley asked: what is considered the Black church? And that is a loaded question. But since I asked, I'm going to at least share the definition that I'm using. I am talking about people who worship, live, and follow in the Black church tradition. all Black people are not members of the Black church. I'm talking about the tradition. You can be in a different kind of denomination and still be Black church if you carry the tradition, the historical, the spiritual, the liberating tradition of what it means to be formerly enslaved people living out God's promise in this world in Black skin. That's what I mean when I say Black church. And people can define it a whole lot of ways. So I'm not saying that's the only way, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'm talking about those churches dedicated to the liberation of Black people through their tradition. Go ahead. Was someone else going to say what?
We've got just a few minutes, and we've got to have our experts come back up and give us a final word. So let us know what you all's experiences have been with the Black church.
So real quick, one, I want to say that definition that Reverend Blackman just gave us, I think should be the definition. Problem is that we have far fewer churches that fit that description. And I think that's why so much of what Reverend Justice, or did I get your name right? Justin said was so true, is that the silence speaks louder than the actual work of the churches that still do on a continuous basis have HIV education as a part of their health ministries that their congregations do. For the churches that we still go in person and do capacity building training with, it's just that the silence is way louder because now we don't just have issues around HIV and AIDS. Now we also are silent about mental health. We're also silent about other chronic diseases. We're silent about menopause. We're silent about, breastfeeding. We're silent about much, like we are not speaking to the Black church in the way and definition that Dr. Blackman just, I think, shared with us. And so that is really, I think, one of our biggest hurdles. Funding, yes, plays a significant role in being able to do that. But I do think that the church has a responsibility to our people and to our community that should not have a price tag on it.
Thank you.
May I just prompt one little thing, Cece? I know we're out of time, and we can deal with this later. I love this question, and Reverend Cece wrote this question. And what happens is what we often do is we talk about what the church should be doing. And a problem that we have is that we don't engage the scripture. What does God say about how we are acting around HIV and AIDS? God has a voice, and we need people writing theological sermons that don't skirt God, that don't make it just about charity. There are scriptures just off the top of my head. I would say the woman with the issue of blood, we don't get to decide what that issue is. We don't get to decide when God heals the woman who comes into the temple bent over and has been ostracized from everyone. There are all kinds of texts. God cares. God loves.
Yes.
People living with HIV and AIDS. And until we can deal with scripture, it's not believable. That's where we are with same gender relationships. We want to talk about what we should do as kind people. You got to engage the text. And if you understand that the Bible is a people's book about a holy God and not God's book about a holy people, then you can read the text in a way that invites people to see God in this.
Yes, that's good.
I do want to just add to this conversation. I agree with what Reverend Tracy just lifted. And I want to just say that I believe that there are those that did break the silence. So when I think about a Deborah Fraser House, who was also instrumental in producing the rapid HIV tests, which was a tool that was used in our communities, along with the way we do our work at Choose Healthy Life, where there's an intersectionality between the importance of the faith connection to the science component of our work. And so as I'm listening to the conversation, I think one of the challenges and the reason why this conversation is so rich
is because we tend to amplify just the negative of our story. And there are other pastors, clergy, churches throughout this country that are really doing impactful work in the way that they are addressing AIDS, HIV, in the way that they're addressing the health initiatives that need to take place in our community. One of the things that I can say about our work is that we engage the clergy. The clergy was front line when the HIV testing was first, put into place. And so they did the test along with their parishioners and the community. And so I think we
I
have
remember that.
so very careful that we don't over amplify the negative, but we also use this type of convening as an opportunity to also amplify the really great work that happens within our community in churches that never get on YouTube, that are never spotlighted on a TikTok, that don't have the infrastructure to amplify their great work because they're heads down in the church, in the trenches, making sure that they're saving their communities and that they're bringing those health and wellness resources and having these kind of conversations. And I think the other thing that's important is our clergy need the space to be able to have raw conversation. In our work, what we've discovered is that they're willing, but they don't feel comfortable sometimes having those conversations in wide open spaces that don't give them the opportunity to take that time to learn and develop and grow as they're growing with their congregation. And so I do think, yes, we have some churches that are silent, but I also think we have some churches that are making a lot of noise and they're making a lot of impact in great ways to make sure that our community gets the education, has the resources. And we actually do that with the education and development of our navigators. Our navigators are very instrumental. And I like to say they use a discipleship model because we know that sometimes we've got to address basic needs to have conversations around health and wellness. I don't really want to have this conversation if I don't know how I'm going to keep my lights on or how I'm going to eat or how I'm going to provide those foundational needs. But if you walk with me through this journey, if you do a little sowing, if you do a little planting, if you do a little watering, I will open up and begin to have a conversation because now I trust you. I trust that you care about me in the fullness of who I am and that you don't dismiss me, right? That you are willing to answer my fundamental questions. And so I believe that we have a lot of churches that are not silent, but they never get the kind of attention that the silence gets. And I just think we have to balance the narrative in our community because we're really dismissing and missing out on so many great churches. And I would even say across denominations, because we work in different denominations of churches, and they are hands-on, consistently asking, how do I become a Choose Healthy Life church? So I think we're getting it done. We just sometimes tend to over amplify instead the silence and the negative instead of balancing that with so much of the great work that's happening within our communities and in our churches across the nation.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome, Reverend Kimberly. I wanted to bring everybody up at this point because there's so much to talk about when it comes to the role of the Black church. We've got to do like 1 or 2 questions, but we had like 10, right? And so that lets us know that this conversation needs to continue. We need to continue and don't look for somebody else to lead it. Y'all lead it. Somebody in the chat, y'all figure out some kind of Zoom, some kind of meeting and make sure that this information is getting passed on. Okay. As we close, I want to turn back to our experts on actions that we can take. We heard from folks who have experience working with Black churches and who are in the Black churches. Reverend Justin, we would love for you to put the link to your book in the chat. We would love to be able to share that with our audiences. Reverend Nancy, Pamela, and Reverend Kimberly, if you all will put your links to your organizations in the chat so people can know how to get resources for churches. But I want to turn back to Dr. Driffin and Dr. Dyson. There's so much that we did not get to, right? And one of the things that I realized we didn't touch on nearly enough was the U equals U. I just want you to take 60 seconds to tell us what U equals U is. Tell us again about PrEP. If somebody in the chat had asked us about whether or not someone who's not sexually active should be on PrEP, I'd like for you to answer that and tell us about PEP again. Okay, these are therapies, medical therapies. I learned that term from Dr. Drift, I want y'all to know last week on IG. Okay, go ahead.
With undetectable equals untransmittable, U equals U. So again, if a person is living with HIV and they're prescribed medication and taking medication as prescribed, more times than not, they will reduce the amount of HIV that's in their system to so low that if they have condomless sex, they will not transmit HIV. Okay. And notice I said condomless sex, not unprotected sex. Okay. Condomless sex factors in the biomedical prevention options that we've been talking about. So PrEP, PEP, DoxyPEP, and post-exposure prophylaxis. Okay, so condomless sex versus unprotected sex. I would also say again, like this. Oh, darn it! This is what the HIV test kits look like when they come to your house. Okay, so like you open it up because this filter is here. But literally, in the comforts of your home, you can learn your status within 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So there are advances that we can take. I'm going to shoot it to Dr. Dyson to get PrEP, PEP, and maybe DoxyPEP.
Yeah, sure. And I'll address Tracy's question first. U equals U. Undetectable equals untransmittable. It's a question asking what does it stand for. So that's what it stands for. And then in terms of
We
PrEP,
can't hear you.
you can't hear me?
No, I can hear her.
Okay.
Oh, I can't hear.
Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So the pre indicates that it's before, right? And before coming in contact, before your sexual encounter. And so what you're doing is prophylaxing or preparing yourself, prepping yourself before that encounter. And so you have several different biomedical intervention options. There's oral options, there are injectable options that you can take on different cadence. It could be daily, you've got bi-monthly, you've got every 6 months. So that's going to be your PrEP option. And then in terms of post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP, as we call it. So PEP is the option after, right, an exposure or a suspected encounter. And so what you would do there is, seek out from a healthcare provider therapy within 72 hours. So we know that in that 72-hour window, that's where we've seen the best success with getting the benefits of post-exposure prophylaxis. That's usually something that's taken orally once a day up through a month's worth of time. And so you would take that, obviously go in, have your regular lab follow-ups. There's different cadence of time periods that you would need to follow up and get labs to check, one for HIV, make sure you're remaining HIV negative. We also do some other kind of safety labs along with that post-exposure prophylaxis as well. And so those are those. And then DoxyPEP is, kind of, I wouldn't say it's the new kid anymore. It's been around a while, but for a lot of people, it's still new. And so we're using doxycycline to cover some of the other STIs. So looking at syphilis and gonorrhea and some of the others, right, that you would think about, and making sure that you have this option to take doxycycline to prophylax again. Or to take it after, during, as you're expecting the encounter, to make sure that you can prevent or protect yourself from other STIs. And so that's looking at the DoxyPEP option as well. There's a lot of good data out there that suggests that this works. And we've seen a lot of reduction in transmission of other STIs as well. And so it's so important to have all of these resources available.
What is one thing, Dr. Driffin, one thing that you would tell people to take action on?
I think explicitly, if you are living with HIV, treatment works. You do not have to die of HIV. You do not have to live with HIV in isolation. There's support systems. I've been a part of support systems, but treatment works beyond a shadow of a doubt. And truth be told, we just published an article about this. HIV treatment is the infrastructure to every other treatment that we have any conversation on. You know, the COVID response is built on top of the HIV treatment response. Okay, so HIV treatment works. You do not have to die alone, and get in care.
Absolutely. Thank you. And the last thing I will say is get tested. Some kind of way, one of our websites dropped off our ticker, but HIV.org. If you go to HIV.org, you'll be able to put in your zip code, find out where you can get tested, find out the nearest treatment site, find out where you can get PrEP and PEP, HIV.org. You can also go to takemehome.org and get a at-home test. We really want to thank all of our panelists for being a part tonight. We really have only scratched the surface. We really have. So don't be surprised, y'all, if we don't call all of y'all back to come back and have another conversation about this. Just consider yourselves a part of the family now, because I've got your number, so you're not going to get away fast, okay? I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our partners, Live Free, the Prophetic Convening, Faith Out Loud, Black Church Freedom Fund, blackdoctor.org, Choose Healthy Life, Viv Healthcare, GBAB, Win with Black Women, State of the People, Network Lobby, Southern Black Girls and Women Consortium, The Bomb and Gilead, et cetera, et cetera. We would not have as many people as we have tonight watching if it were not for all of our partners coming together to make sure that we recognize World AIDS Day. So thank you all so very much. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Reverend Tracy, for her last remarks, and then Pastor Mike.
Thank you. I have been enlightened. I've learned so much. And more than just learning, it is so wonderful to see how many people are in this fight together. Thank you for your work.
And obviously, we want this information to go widely, broadly. So all of you all that are here, please share these links, the streams. We're excited to put some of this stuff into some more digestible reels and posts that'll feature a lot of our guest words. So when you see that stuff popping up on Instagram and Facebook and social media, please share that as well. But we're grateful for the partnership tonight, and I believe we're going to have Reverend Kimberly Williams close us out in a word of prayer.
And she didn't know that, but this is what we do in the Black Church. Go ahead, Reverend Williams, and pray.
She was preaching a minute ago.
The only thing I want to add to what you all said, every church that has a presence, we need to host a conversation in our churches. Mm-hmm. Like this should be the activation to say, no longer should any church be silent. This should be the point where we say, bring it on in and let's sit down and talk. Let's use the tables to have a rich conversation. So let us thank you, everyone, and let us go into prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for bringing us to this conversation, to this moment and this time. And we are most grateful for each and every panelist, each and every clergy member. We thank you for the leaders of this great work. And God, we echo the prayers of Bishop Daughtry, that if we just help one, help us, oh God, to not dismiss, to not walk past, to not think that whatever you give us to do, whatever you've placed in our hands, if we use it, lives can be changed and our communities can be transformed. So I pray, God, that we leave this space on tonight activated, empowered, and equipped to not let the end of this moment stop the conversation, but we use it as fire and as oil to flame us forward. We thank you for this moment in time. In the blessed name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
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 And thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, Reverend Nancy. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you.
Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Justin. Good night.
Good night.
Night.